whether it's trauma, sudden cardiac arrest, poisoning, snake bite, whatever the reason is. If you can't immediately resuscitate them, at some point you're going to give up. And instead of giving up, you would use EPR.
Well, welcome, Dr. Yaffe. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Business Line podcast. Real pleasure to have you here. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
Fantastic. As you can see, it's Christmas season here. At our office, we're pretty excited for the time and actually really excited to kind of dive in, learn about you, your journey, and kind of what brought you to what you're doing today. I can't wait to share with our audience about what you're doing. So why don't you maybe quickly introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, Doctor.
My name is Lyn Yaffe. I was raised in Baltimore, Maryland. I went to Johns Hopkins University undergraduate, majoring in biophysics. I had early admission to the University of Maryland Medical School. I went there, and then I did postgraduate work at Columbia University in pathology. And I was always involved in research, even while in medical school. But when I was at Columbia, I did some research there and started also doing research at what was then called the Roche Institute of Molecular Biology, sort of an independent research institute of Huffman LaRoche. And while working there in Nutley, New Jersey, and across the river at Columbia University, I had obligated service in the Navy. This was at the Vietnam War. To ensure that you could finish all of your residency training, you would obligate yourself to 4 years. Otherwise, you ran the risk of being drafted. And no sooner than I signed on the dotted line obligating myself to 4 years, of course, the Vietnam War came to an end. So eventually the Navy contacted me and said I needed to fulfill my obligation. So I went to what was called the Naval Medical Research Institute in Bethesda, across from NIH, which is a medical research lab of the Navy. And I spent a number of years there. And in the early days, the Navy they gave you money to do whatever you wanted to do. That's not true anymore, of course. And in the, sort of the second half of my time in the Navy, you had to do something specific to benefit the Navy. But after a few years, I said, well, this is a good thing. So there was no point in getting out. I mean, I had offers to go other places, but I stayed in the Navy. Most of my 20 years as a naval medical officer, I was what's called a beltway sailor, meaning I stayed within the Washington Beltway. The only time I stepped foot on a ship was when it was in dock, like in Portsmouth, Virginia, or Norfolk, or in San Diego on a trip. I never actually, I was never on a ship when they pulled anchor and went anywhere. But I've been on submarines when they're, at Newport at New London in Connecticut. But so I was a beltway a sailor, and of course they didn't let you stay at one place your whole 20 years. So while most of my time I spent at the lab bench, I also spent time at the Navy Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, working for the Surgeon General of the Navy. That time it was Admiral Zimble. I spent time in the office of the Director of Research and Engineering at the Pentagon. I was a program manager for a number of years. While at the bench, I handled tens of millions of dollars in Navy research money that went to Navy labs and also to university contracts to do research required by the Navy. And in my latter years of a program manager, there was always concern about, obviously, and I did most of my work in combat casualty care, concern about how to save those killed in action on the battlefield, which is an Army, Navy, Marine Corps issue. Sure. There's good data on those killed in action, let's say going back to the Vietnam War. And in Vietnam and subsequent U.S. conflicts, all the way up to the current day, 80% of those killed in action die from massive bleeding. before, internal bleeding, extremity bleeding, that you can't stop all of the bleeding adequately with any tourniquet. So they rapidly go into cardiac arrest from the loss of blood. It's called exsanguination cardiac arrest. And all of the data is that 80% of those
80%.
killed in action die from that exsanguination cardiac arrest. In Vietnam, when they do autopsies on many of those, and in more recent years, they're able to use imaging to look at the injuries. And many of those killed in action have repairable injuries, assuming if you could put them on the operating table immediately and give them adequate fluid, they have repairable injuries, but that can't be done on the battlefield, even though, surgeons are brought fairly close to the front line, so to speak. It's very hard to do what needs to be done, in the combat theater. So that was always a concern of the Navy and the Army, what to do for those 80% killed in action. The other 20%, they'll have massive head wounds and so they can't be saved. And so at a conference, I met Dr. Peter Safar. And Dr. Peter Safar, he's considered the father of cardiopulmonary resuscitation. He invented mouth-to-mouth breathing, integrated it with sort of the beginnings of chest compressions that weren't adequately done if you can't get oxygen in. So he started a program for cardiopulmonary resuscitation after he invented mouth-to-mouth. They had other procedures then, you're probably too young to recall, where they would raise your arms over your head and do crazy things, but none of those procedures got in enough oxygen until mouth-to-mouth was done. And he wrote a book called The ABCs of Resuscitation that became the manual for first responders. And actually in those late 50s, early 60s, there was no 911 to call. There were no paramedics. There were just ambulance drivers. And Dr. Safar trained the first paramedics. He was at the University of Pittsburgh then. And he got together a group of African-American men who were unemployed or hospital orderlies. And he and his protege at the time, whose name was Nancy Caroline, they trained the first paramedic team. And it was called Freedom House. And they were on 24/7 standby, that team, the different members, and they would be called by the police department in Pittsburgh if they thought it was a medical reason that they were called. Before 911, it was the police who would get called. And they went out, and, there are funny anecdotes and I've met, about a year ago, I met some of those first paramedics from Freedom House trained by Dr. Safar, and they were in their 80s. But they said sometimes they would go into a white neighborhood, and if it's a man who had a heart attack, let's say, and he needed CPR, the people there would say, well, I don't want an African-American resuscitating my husband. And obviously, we're talking about the early 60s. And so things have obviously changed. But Dr. Safar went around the world, and his early paramedics, they went to other cities and they trained more paramedics. And in the early 60s, 911 was started. And he designed really the first paramedic ambulance he designed. And he did a number of other firsts. He's responsible for having the first independent department of anesthesiology. He was an anesthesiologist. And in those late 50s, early 60s, anesthesiologists worked in the Department of Surgery. But now, of course, every place has an independent department. He was at Johns Hopkins at the time, in the Department of Surgery, and he asked if the surgeons would permit an independent department of anesthesiology. Having an independent department is important for professional growth and research and, independence. And Hopkins said no. And so he went to the University of Pittsburgh, where he had friends, and a department was started there. He also, for CPR, it's interesting, you can look up on YouTube or Wikipedia, the first mannequin for practicing CPR he developed called Resusci Annie. It was a full
Resusci
life
Annie.
mannequin, and it was made in Europe by a Norwegian company called Lærdal. And Lærdal was a doll company that made dolls that would close their eyes when you put them down to go to sleep. But Dr. Saffer had to make a mannequin, and they used the face of the death mask of a woman who drowned in the Seine River in Paris, a very beautiful young lady. And that became
Wow.
the first Resusci Annie. And the company, Norwegian company Lærdal, now they don't make dolls anymore. They make simulators, defibrillators, and other medical
They got into the
equipment. And
medical
they're an
business.
international company. So there's an interesting story there. Now, when Dr. Saffer became aware of the fact that 80% of combat casualties die from massive bleeding and that nothing could be done, he said the only thing you can do is rapid, profound hypothermia. And in those early days, in the mid 90s, or the early to mid 90s, when he received funding for this through the Navy and Army efforts, he called it suspended animation, temporary suspended animation. He said, don't worry about resuscitating the patient, just prevent their vital organs from dying. You don't have to resuscitate them. Just keep the heart, the brain, the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, keep those vital organs from dying. Now, how do you do that? You lower the temperature of those organs or the whole body down to 10 degrees Celsius, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. At that low temperature, the body or those organs don't need oxygen for at least 3 hours because you've lowered the metabolism to the point where the cellular life is sort of in suspended animation. You don't need oxygen. Obviously, you can't stay that way forever. That's science fiction. And maybe in the future, you will be able to be in suspended animation for years. But if you cool the body down, particularly the brain and heart, where oxygen is really critical, then you have a 3 to 4 hour window where you don't have to worry about doing CPR. There's no need for oxygen. There's no heartbeat. There are no brain waves. I mean, you could say that the patient or the victim appears dead, but there's still cellular life. So if you can repair their injuries and then rewarm them, they can then be what's called delayed resuscitated. You may have heard, and in the medical literature, there are anecdotal stories where someone is buried in an avalanche.
Sure.
We're talking about a healthy skier. They're buried in an avalanche, and it takes a couple of hours for the rescuers to find them, and then they rewarm them. And lo and behold, sometimes those people are resuscitated, even though they haven't had any heartbeat and no respirations for a couple of hours, but they cool down so fast that they don't require the oxygen, and then they're able to be resuscitated. Now, it's a different game when you're talking about a combat casualty or a gunshot victim or an automobile accident victim that can't be resuscitated. But the principle is the same. Don't try to resuscitate them. Just keep them from dying until you can get them to a hospital and do surgical repairs. There have also been some cases where small children have fallen into a great lake in the United States in the middle of winter, and they cool down so fast that the divers are able to find them, retrieve them, and then rewarm them. And so that's what EPR is about. It's about cooling the patient down. If you can't resuscitate them immediately by CPR and defibrillation, well, cool them down, take them to the hospital, or if this happened in a hospital, cool them down in the hospital, do the surgical repairs, get everything done, the patient closed. They're hooked up to what's called a cardiopulmonary bypass machine because you have to give them back blood because the cool down procedure is done with ice cold saline. So you've essentially flushed out their blood with a cold solution. And so on cardiopulmonary bypass, you return the blood, you've typed them by then, or you use universal donor blood. and then you rewarm them on the cardiopulmonary bypass machine. And then lo and behold, if all has gone well, their heart spontaneously starts to beat. If it doesn't start to spontaneously beat, you can defibrillate them to get their heart started. Now, for many years, research was done in large animals, pigs, and, they would, under anesthesia, of course, they would bleed the pig, perform some surgical trauma like removing the spleen or whatever. They would let them go into cardiac arrest, wait 5 minutes, do pig CPR, and obviously there's not enough blood in the animal. You can't get the heart started. Then they give the pig blood back, and then after they do the repairs, they would give the blood back, rewarm them, and then lo and behold, the large animals, they'd be resuscitated, and they'd get up after a little while, and usually animals, pigs are smart. They could be trained to do things. And then after these procedures, they would remember whatever tricks you taught them. And it took a number of years to get the FDA to approve a clinical trial of this. So I don't want you all to get ahead of the idea, but we're in a clinical trial now at Maryland Shock Trauma. We'd like to keep a lid on the results until the FDA looks at it, but some information initially got out a couple of years ago in the medical news literature. It said a human being had been put in suspended animation for the first time. That was us, and that's the story. It's not a panacea. Just like everybody who gets CPR done doesn't necessarily stand up and is in good health. Sometimes, or many times, the person is very lucky and they are resuscitated. They go to a hospital. Maybe they need something done to their heart, stents or whatever, and then they're doing fine. They go home, and if they had good CPR done, mentally they're 100%. Sometimes a person is resuscitated, but they're not mentally there afterwards. And it may be because CPR was started too late, or the CPR was done by a bystander and they didn't get adequate oxygen in, until the paramedics there. So the same problems that you have after CPR, because EPR would come after, let's say, a failed CPR, we may still have recovery problems. That's why ultimately, if the FDA likes what's being done and we have reasonable results, they'll allow us to start EPR earlier in a difficult CPR case. Right now, the clinical trial is done with a number of FDA requirements, which are understandable. It's the way research procedures are done. For instance, the person that will get EPR performed on them cannot go into cardiac arrest until they arrive at the trauma center. So if you're a gunshot victim or an automobile accident victim and you're bleeding, and if you go into cardiac arrest at the scene of the accident, you're not going to be an EPR candidate because the surgeons back at the trauma center don't know time zero. So if you're bleeding, you have to have heart function, cardiac function, until you get to the hospital. Then it's okay to go into cardiac arrest because the surgeons are there. They say, oh, this guy went into cardiac arrest. We'll do the very best CPR. They may work on you for 30 or 40 minutes. They intubate you. You're getting the best CPR. And if that still doesn't work, then they open an envelope and say, well, we'll do EPR on this person. Or the envelope says, no, this will be a control person. They have to have control. So there are restrictions, but it's a step-by-step process like any new medical advance. So, this will work. Profound hypothermia is one step lower than what's called deep hypothermia. Deep hypothermia goes to about 16 degrees Celsius. We go down to 10 degrees Celsius. 16-degree cooling on cardiopulmonary bypass is frequently done for neurovascular surgery. They want to lower your blood pressure during that neurovascular surgery so you don't have a brain bleed. And so they cool you down to take the edge off of oxygen demands for your brain, and to prevent any perhaps bleeding problems. So hypothermia is not unknown in the medical field. There's mild, I'll say mild, deep, and profound. We do profound. Deep is done in some surgical procedures now while you're on cardiopulmonary bypass. Mild hypothermia is just 2 to 3 degrees lower than normal being 37 degrees Celsius. If you drop your temperature 2 or 3 degrees Celsius, it doesn't stop your heart from beating. If you go cooler than 3 degrees, you run into the possibility of your heart stopping. So mild hypothermia that doesn't stop your heart from beating is used in severe cardiac arrest. When someone is resuscitated with CPR, but they remain unconscious, most university centers put that person or maintain that person in mild hypothermia by cooling blankets is the most common way of doing it. Sometimes they'll put a cooling catheter through a groin vessel into your vena cava, and they shunt cold fluid in and out of that blind end catheter. That's sort of a metal tube on the end of it to help cool your blood a few degrees. So hypothermia is not unknown in the medical field. Profound hypothermia that we do is not done until EPR. And so I should also add, like in every major medical intervention now that requires monitoring and decision support, artificial intelligence is being used and looked at, particularly in radiology, where it's a matter of saying, well, here's my X-ray, my MRI, my CT scan. How does that compare to 10,000 others that have the same complaint? And the AI can notice more problems than, let's say, or assured not to miss anything that a radiologist might miss. They've already discovered that mammography for women looking for breast cancer at the universities that are implementing AI as an experimental procedure to look at those mammograms, the mammogram looked at by artificial intelligence capability doesn't miss the tiniest of lesion. It's amazing. And you've probably been to your ophthalmologist for an eye exam, looking at your retina and all of those different things that are done by equipment. And then the ophthalmologist comes in at the last minute, looks at all these images on the screen and tells you what's going to be done. Ophthalmology is so image intensive in a sense that artificial intelligence can do it. Yes, you still want to have an ophthalmologist say, this is the AI recommendation and what they found. So the same will be for EPR. EPR needs monitoring of brain waves, cardiac function, oxygen, temperature, the speed of the cooling solution, and then whether you have to maintain, once they get to the cold target temperature of 10 degrees and you transport them doing surgery, you still want monitoring to go on because maybe you need to continue to cool them a little bit during that 3-hour procedure. So AI is monitoring all those things and advising the first responder and the surgeon where we are in the procedure and is everything being maintained properly, and even giving some advice if there's some glitches in the procedure or what to modify. Augmented reality together with AI comes into the fact that for a patient where CPR has failed and we have to do EPR, you have to put a large bore catheter like the size of your finger, into an arterial vessel, let's say into the femoral artery in the groin or into the arch of the aorta. So we've developed techniques using ultrasound. I won't go into all the details, but ultrasound where it can locate the arch of the aorta and it knows where the tip of the introducer is for the catheter. And it's almost like a video game where you can guide your catheter in by watching a monitor. And the paramedic can see that with augmented reality, almost like the ultrasound image is placed over the patient in a sense. So you see, you're looking inside the patient with augmented reality. And all of that is possible now. It's all possible from advanced technology, from gaming and whatnot, that you can look at an ultrasound image superimposed over the patient, and that'll help guide your catheter. Ultimately, we want to have a fully automated system that is augmented reality performed by artificial intelligence to put a catheter in the right place. So there's no time delays once a decision is made, or while you're doing CPR, just in case you're not successful with CPR, you get a catheter placed. And so I think that's the future, AI and augmented reality in order to perform and monitor EPR and then get them to the hospital for the surgeons to do what they have to do. And I guess at one point in the near to distant future, the surgery will be done by a robot, as there is robotic surgery done in some circumstances.
Well, it's interesting. The first place my mind starts to go while you're talking to this about this subject now, and you're talking about the different technologies, it kind of was born, your work born out of working in the military and the Navy, and how a lot of the times technologies come out of, the poor situations that happen during, the tragic times of war. But then you're talking about entertainment type things, gaming and augmented reality and virtual reality, how that helps with the tech. But I'm thinking, I remember being in college back in the early 2000s, and all the different buildings, they started, I was in fundraising for the college too. We started fundraising to put in AEDs in the building, the shock things to bring people back. And just years before that, you would only see those in shows, and they were only at hospitals. You weren't touching those things, only the professionals. I mean, imagine a point where, like, down the road, you could save someone using an EPR machine, and if the technology got advanced enough, that someone could put on a device, it would show them right exactly what to do, give them the confidence to be able to do it with some basic training, where you could save a lot of lives.
Oh, you're absolutely right. That is the future. In the U.S., every day there are about 1,500 people, give or take, that suffer from sudden cardiac arrest. And there are various advances that are being made, obviously CPR, obviously EPR, to try and save those people when CPR fails. There are another 500 or so people that are trauma victims, whether they're automobile accidents is a big one, gunshot wounds is a big one. There's a possibility, depending on the circumstances, that this could be used in drug overdoses, with fentanyl. If you can't get Narcan to the patient, and if time has gone on that Narcan is not immediately effective, and you start CPR, by mouth to mouth and cardiac compressions, in some cases, maybe EPR could be used. So whenever someone's in cardiac arrest, whether it's trauma, sudden cardiac arrest, poisoning, snake bite, whatever the reason is, if you can't immediately resuscitate them, at some point you're going to give up. And instead of giving up, you would use EPR.
So, I mean, this isn't so, obviously there's some sci-fi stuff as people start thinking, wow, freezing brains and stuff like that. But I'm thinking so how fast, you're saying rapid decrease in body temperature down to that 50 or so degree Fahrenheit level. Right. How fast does that have to happen to be effective?
As soon as, let's say you're doing CPR, you've done defibrillation, you're continuing CPR, you cannot get the heart started. Maybe you've tried defibrillation 2-3 times at most if you're in the field. So you say, now in this day and age, you would say, well, we've tried defibrillation 3 times. We've been doing this for 20 minutes now. we're going to give up. Then if you do EPR, from the time you start pumping in that cold solution, you must reach target temperature within, let's say, 10 minutes, 8 to 11 minutes.
So you have 10
Because
minutes
you're
to
good
go from
without oxygen.
98.6.
Well, remember, even though you're doing EPR, you probably want to continue. If you're obviously a first responder, you'll have a breathing bag and you may have intubated the patient or just a mask breathing. You're not doing mouth to mouth. You're using what's called an ambu bag. And so you continue that while you're cooling, so that while the oxygen may be needed by the brain as you're cooling down a little bit. But once you get to target temperature, you don't have to worry about that. But you need to do it quickly. And so training and certification will be necessary for those first responders, like any training is needed for them, but it's done quickly. It's done quickly. Let's say within 10 minutes. The faster, the better, and the colder, the better. Not freezing. This is not freezing.
Right.
We're above freezing temperatures, but the colder, the better. And the faster, the better. Now, at the Saffer Center, which is named at the University of Pittsburgh, which is named after Dr. Saffer, he died in 2003, and I worked with him from about 1995 until his death. He worked up until about 10 days before he died from cancer. But they did a lot of work in animals, rats plus larger animals. Is there a way we can do this and protect the brain at a higher temperature? In other words, instead of going to 10 degrees, can we just go to 16 degrees Celsius or 20 degrees Celsius together with additives in the ice cold saline that would help to protect the brain? And some of that work is still being done. There are, I won't get into some of the potential drugs that could be used to sort of take the edge off of going down to 10 degrees Celsius. There are a lot of neuroprotectants that are worked on for other reasons than EPR, reasons of stroke, that seem to have a tremendous beneficial effects on recovery after stroke. And these could be used in CPR, in EPR. And so there's a lot of research and even clinical trials going on with that. So I think one day EPR may be able to be done at a higher temperature than 10 degrees Celsius, but we're not there yet. Our goal is to complete the clinical trial, see what the FDA says. The FDA may say, this is wonderful, everything worked out fine, but we need to expand the clinical trial to make sure that more centers are capable of doing it. I'm not predicting what they're saying. These are just options. They may say, okay, you've done this at one center, one trauma center, and Maryland Shock Trauma is a premier trauma center. The clinical trial is run by Sam Tischerman, who's another protege of Dr. Saffer. And the head trauma surgeon at Maryland Shock Trauma is Tom Scalia, who's recognized as like one of the top 2 or 3 trauma surgeons in the world. He's a strong supporter of EPR technology, but the FDA may want to expand the clinical trial. It's hard to predict. But, in one sense, EPR is about the immediate possibility of saving a life. It's not like we have a cancer drug that we think may be better than this other cancer drug. And, they make a comparison, and it's not as though people aren't being treated with the previous cancer drug. And so in one sense, EPR, if you don't approve EPR, assuming a successful clinical trial, and I'm sure we're going to be successful, without it, you're letting all those people with failed CPR die. You're not giving them one more chance at survival. So I think the FDA looks at that. And, we went through a long process of medical ethics.
Sure.
Because, people relate failed CPR to death, and we had to make it clear and have the what do you call it? A community committees to look at this and give approval. They'll have teachers and ministers on a panel to look at this. But, we don't want people to have the impression as though we're resurrecting anyone. We're not resurrecting anyone. We're preventing people from dying. Big difference. But it takes public education, and we're aware of that. And I think podcasts are part of that to let people know it's coming down the pike, because we want EPR to be used appropriately and correctly. We don't want things to people to use it indiscriminately. It'll require training, certification. And we hope to have a simulator done so that people will be able, to practice on a simulator in a hospital. Doing CPR, it's interesting that major medical centers now, for many procedures like CPR, unrelated CPR, but a group of nurses and doctors that may respond to a code saying a patient is going into cardiac arrest, we need CPR, and they go to the room to do CPR. Those people, usually yearly or every 2 years, they're trained in a simulation environment, because they discover, like any group that goes to an emergency, they may waste a precious minute looking around at each other saying, well, who's going to do this? Who's going to do that?
What do we do?
Who's in charge?
Yeah.
But they all know about how to, let's say, lead the team and get started. And someone say, okay, you do this, you do that, you do this. And simulation training breaks down that wall of, well, I don't want to, step on anybody's toes.
Right. Yeah.
And take charge. And so you've got a much better chance of successful CPR where the professionals go through annual or twice yearly or every 2 years, some sort of simulation training. And in medical school now, medical and nursing school, my God, they do a huge amount of simulation training. Every medical school now has a simulation center. Pittsburgh has one of the very first, but every medical school has simulation where they can go and practice on full-size mannequins that have different medical symptoms and problems, and sometimes they speak and respond. And if you make a mistake, of course, the simulator dies on you and tells you what you did wrong. And it's a very interesting environment.
Yeah, some would say even the fact, the ability to do simulations like that would have been science fiction 40 years ago. You know what I mean? From that standpoint, it's just amazing.
Right. And it's all due to advanced computer technology.
Yeah.
So yeah, Dr. Yaffe, like my question. So anyway, let me introduce myself. I'm Manny. Can you hear me? My mic is on mute.
Speak a little bit louder, perhaps.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I can
So
hear
yeah, let me introduce myself. I'm Manny. So my question would be, okay, in the future, if everything works out well, all the clinical trials are successful, can we straight away, go to EPR instead of, jumping the hoops like, CPR and, like defibrillator? Why not, just give patients straight away EPR rather than, trying CPR? I mean, do you think that, these CPR and defibrillator will become obsolete once EPR becomes...
I think that's a very interesting and exciting point you made. Mm-hmm. That if you look at the patient and say, oh, we have to do CPR on this patient, why don't we just do EPR? Yeah. Because the whole idea is to maximally protect the brain.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you immediately do mouth to mouth, and a few chest compressions just while you're putting in that catheter, or having your AI robotic device put in that catheter, cool them down.
Yeah.
And then you resuscitate them afterwards, once you get them back to the hospital. And that may be the future. It's a stepwise thing with the FDA.
Yeah.
But the whole idea is to make sure the brain is protected. And if the best way to do that is to do immediate EPR or head
Yeah.
cooling or something that gets
I mean,
that
that
brain
makes
cooled
sense.
down and protected. Maybe as an interim thing, right now, if CPR is being done on someone, they may set up, depending on the situations, to start an IV, but they're not giving them brain protected drugs.
Right.
Maybe there'll be an interim step where as soon as someone needs CPR, the first thing you do is shoot them full of a drug that is designed to protect the brain from needing too much oxygen. But I think you make an excellent point.
I think it'll come down to the invasiveness of it, right? If once technology step by step gets to the point where that catheter might not need to be so big, or you can get the liquid to where it needs to be faster and with less invasiveness, and then then you make it easier for it to be performed.
Right.
And then
I know,
think
some
moment it's
people.
easier
Yeah,
than
I mean,
the others.
even though right now the catheter is big,
Yeah.
I mean, I would like, if I'm going through some, experience like that, I would like people to, do the EPR on me first rather than trying to do the CPR and
Right.
defibrillator. Yeah.
You're not going to even be conscious.
People
so.
have looked at, and I think there's still some clinical trials. There are definitely clinical trials going on where what can you do to cool the brain more directly while doing CPR? And people have talked about inhaling a cold vapor, like if you're cooling something through the nostrils, you get your sinuses cooled down, and that has
You get the
an
brain
impact
freeze
on
from
the
ice
brain.
cream.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so, that's what it's all about, is cooling the brain. So people are looking at various techniques, and EPR would be let's say, the immediate way of doing it.
Yeah, the go-to procedure.
And
Yeah.
hopefully one day that'll be true. I think sooner than later.
Just imagine the thousands of lives. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Oh, and in third world countries, in one sense, where you need to buy time for transport from rural areas, if you can at least get EPR done at that remote location. I mean, you need to have the cool solution available, or the neuroprotectants, and you need the catheter kit there and someone who knows how to do it, and whatever degree of automation is available, fine. But buying time is very important for the helicopter or the ambulance to get there and transport the patient. So I think EPR will have an important impact in third world countries that do have medical capabilities, particularly in their larger urban areas, less so in their rural environments. But if they can get EPR into the rural environment, I think that would be very helpful. That's even true in the U.S., that in a remote location, that
3 hours is a lifetime.
may have difficulty.
Lifetime. I mean,
Yeah.
from my experience, one of my uncle, he was in a remote location in India,
Yeah.
and by the time, they took him to the hospital, he died on the way, and it took exactly, around 3-4 hours for him to be transported. So, with the technology like this, I mean, it will save lots of lives,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Doc, you've had an unbelievably varied life leading up to this point. At what point did you kind of realize that you were kind of shifting down this road in particular and going to be kind of dedicating your energy to this EPR technology?
Well, I think it really, I owe it all to Dr. Saffer from the
It's all meeting him. That was the tipping point.
Yeah, he was an amazing guy. I mean, I got involved with him because there was always a military interest in how can we save those killed in action.
Right.
But he brought it to a reality, and he was an amazing guy. I mean, he was inspirational, dedicated to his work, dedicated to saving lives. And so that was an amazing fellow. I had the honor of being one of the 7 people at his memorial service to give a eulogy. So at the University of Pittsburgh, they have the Heinz Chapel, which is a cathedral-like building that was built by, the original Heinz, because he thought there was no church grand enough in Pittsburgh for his son to be married. So he built this cathedral, essentially. And ultimately, in current times, no family wants to maintain a cathedral. So they gave it to the University of Pittsburgh. And now the University of Pittsburgh, I guess if you're having a wedding, you can rent it or whatever the charge is. But for distinguished professors and members of the University of Pittsburgh, they'll have memorial services there. So he had a memorial service that must have been, it was standing room only, maybe over 3,000 people. And they started off, like the first eulogizer was lowly me. And then, Sam Tischerman, who's our trauma surgeon for the clinical trial, Pat Kahanick, another protege who's the current director and distinguished professor, director of the Saffer Center, and the chairman and CEO of Laerdal, who I had mentioned made the first for Susani, the son of the original guy, the dean of the medical school and the chancellor of the university. I may have left someone out. And there was an army representative there at that. So, he had who gets 7 or 8 eulogies. And so he was a very distinguished, wonderful individual. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize 3 times. They put his name in, and a lot of people have to endorse that. He was never awarded the Nobel Prize, but to be nominated is a privilege.
It's a pretty big thing, yeah.
He knew everyone. It was fun spending time with him, not only in the laboratory, but also going to dinner with him. Wherever I would go with him in Pittsburgh, everybody knew him. If on occasion we go to the Pittsburgh Symphony, he could go backstage. Everyone knew him. He was an amazing guy, no question about it. Many of his proteges are the trauma surgeons all over Europe. And, it's quite amazing. They would come from all over the world to train with Dr. Saffer.
Okay, so Doc, about this technology, the EPR technology that, we are talking about here, was this first thought of and, started working on only in US, or it's being, being researched on around, globally?
Well, we have plans for initially moving into, let's say, the European Union and the UK. We've been contacted by trauma surgeons who follow what we do in the UK, and they want to implement this as soon as, we're ready to involve them. And the same with some of Dr. Saffer's proteges in European countries who'd like to, see the data when the FDA does it and to implement it there. And we don't have enough money to, let's say, start a clinical trial in Europe as we would like to do. We're very close to having significant investment dollars. We're working with a few investment groups now. I guess it's best or appropriate for me not to name them,
Sure.
But they're doing their due diligence. They're very excited about it. So I hope, my fingers are crossed, that by the end of this year or in early January, we'll have sufficient funds to really move forward on a I won't say global, but let's say industrialized world approach. I mean,
no, absolutely.
I guess it's the way of all things. We have to do industrialized countries first, and then we still are dedicated to getting this to third world countries. I mean, you mentioned India. India is more than capable of implementing this, in their urban areas. No question about it. They have all the necessary capabilities to do this. South Africa has all the capabilities. Japan, obviously. China has the capabilities in their urban centers. Australia. And so it can be done around the world.
Yeah. But Europe first, because, their population is already on the decline. So we need to save lives there first. India, we don't have to worry.
Yeah, and we have more
we can produce faster than anyone else.
I have some contacts in India, and it all boils down to a question of money.
Yeah.
Where the FDA is and money.
Yeah.
You can only handle
speaking
so
of
much
that,
at one time.
Doctor, it almost seems like a foregone conclusion. We're getting close to this happening. Was there a time in your journey from inception and meeting Dr. Saffer and coming along? Was there a time when you thought that you were up against an obstacle you weren't able to overcome? I love stories of struggle and overcoming that struggle. And you're here now.
Well, I don't know whether I'd call it a struggle, but certainly there are hurdles. The FDA was a hurdle. Getting everything in place, exactly, what the protocol was going to be, what restrictions they were going to be, the ethics of this, Sam Tischerman and the Saffer Center. We had to get, some distinguished medical ethicists to sort of write supporting letters. And there was always, and there still is, the concern, and I don't want to, waste a lot of your time with it, but there's, in the U.S. in particular, there's always the concern about who pays. Okay.
Sure.
Emergency medical services cannot be denied, regardless of your socioeconomic status in the U.S. If the paramedics come, or if you walk into the emergency room and you have no insurance and it's an emergency, you get treated. And if you need CPR, you'll get CPR. And if you're resuscitated, they may say, well, okay, well, he's resuscitated. Who's going to pay for the aftercare? Like if you need rehab for some reason, or if you go to the emergency room, you had a stroke, and okay, they've gotten you over the critical period. Who's going to pay for the rehab if you have no insurance? Well, it's sort of a complex system in the U.S., and the bottom line is that the government, in some form or another, whether it's Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's grants to hospitals to help them offset, their non-compensated care, in one sense, the taxpayers pay. It's how it gets distributed. At hospitals, they can't deny care. So they have to say, well, how are we going to pay for that emergency care procedures or the emergencies? How they're going to care? And
there's always a way. We figure out ways to let's say make endowments and get billions of dollars.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Now, basically government programs in one form or another. It would be nice if it all came under national health care, like in the UK or most other European countries. There's not a question of who pays, but in this country, it's always a question someone asks, how the decisions are made and who pays. Well, it's against the law not to provide emergency services.
Yeah, Lyn, I worked in
FDA approved and it'll save a life. It's got to be attempted.
I worked in fundraising for a number of years when I was young. I studied nonprofit administration. I cut my teeth in fundraising. And listen, if you can, it's sales. I'm doing sales now. If you have a story that you can tell in a way that emotionally connects with people that have either a little bit of money to spare or a lot of money can be raised and put no place to pay for these kind of things. It doesn't necessarily, I don't think, always have to be like the taxpayer or even insurance provider. We work in that world too. Like with the right goal in mind and a way to get there. I look at colleges and universities. Yeah, educating kids or young people to become whatever they need to be to provide for scholarships. That's all great things, but it's nowhere near as important as saving a life.
Oh yeah.
And if you get the right person or right team at behind a big network hospital or even university hospitals to start an endowment that all it's meant to do is save the lives of people with EPR, you can make sure that it's always paid for. Right?
Yeah, so. And eventually the U.S. is going to get to the point where there's universal health care. In one sense, in the military and for veterans, it's already universal health care for them. And for people over 65 with Medicare, it's virtually universal health care and Medicaid. So the U.S. is getting there. It's true.
In time.
We'll get there in some
The market
form.
will dictate. If we, the market will dictate and make it work. You're doing a magnificent job of moving this forward, which we're I didn't know anything about this before today, but I'm crazy excited about just kind of keeping tabs on it and telling everybody about
it. Tell everyone about it, and maybe I would like to donate for this cause.
I would if I was asked in a heartbeat.
I mean, you have a site somewhere there that we can go and donate.
How can people find out more about what you're doing, Doctor?
I always keep this. If people go to our website,
okay,
if you can see that, www.epr-technologies.com or epr-technology singular.com. Both.
Yeah, we'll include this in the description and stuff for sure.
Is there a place you can donate in the site?
Well, you can go to WeFunder. The crowdfunding WeFunder.
Sure.
And it's a, there's, I think, a $400 minimum that we're asking. And we've only just started there, so I think there's $800. We raised more money on. We started off a little while ago with Start Engine. We did that for 3 months, and we raised about $90,000 after they take their small amount off the top. But we had about 175 investors, small investors. $200 or so each, which is very gratifying that there are 170 or so, 180 investors who found this intriguing.
Yeah.
And
we should connect them with our friend over at Gusher.
Yeah.
This is the type of idea. I mean, this is past the ideal point.
I believe, if you remove the cap of the, minimum amount, more and more people, every month would like to be part of this. I mean, I would, if there is no...
Is this more minimum, of a donation or is it an investment?
Yeah.
Well, we'll take investments any size. You can do it by WeFunder. You can do a $20,000 investment via Angel List. Or look, you can email me directly or at our website. Email addresses are there. And, we can negotiate, smaller amounts. I'm open to anything that's legal under the SEC rules, of course.
You betcha. Absolutely.
Okay, so Doc, we talked about, your animal trials were successful. And now you're doing... Yeah, so now you're doing human trials. So what stage are we at, in the human trials? I mean,
I think, because of the criteria for selection of a patient, that they have to go into cardiac arrest in the trauma center, it's a slow process. So I'm thinking we will have accumulated the 20 required patients in, I would say, another 3 to 6 months maximum.
Wow. That's cool.
Okay.
And then the data will be available for the FDA to look at. And the FDA may say, oh, this is great, let's expand the trial. Or they may say, let's do another 20 patients at Maryland Shock Trauma. It can be difficult to predict with the FDA. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're going to say, forget this.
Oh, yeah.
It's too important.
Yeah, I can definitely see, EPR Technologies becoming the Microsoft or Amazon of the, healthcare industry.
Well, that would be great.
I will be one of your investors.
So let's push over into some fun stuff. Getting to know you a little bit better, Doctor.
Okay.
So, do you celebrate Christmas?
Not really. My wife. My wife used to celebrate, but she died in 2014.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
She was a liver transplant patient. She had what's called, just for the viewers, if they want to look something up, she had erythropoietic protoporphyria, which is a genetic disease having to do with chelating hemoglobin. So the precursor of hemoglobin accumulates in the bone marrow, spills out, and causes a micronodular cirrhosis of the liver. So when she was 42, she needed a liver transplant, and the transplant functioned for another 25 years. But of course, her underlying condition eventually damaged that transplanted liver. And then, she wasn't eligible for another liver transplant.
Yeah.
Now they're working on her underlying condition. In one sense, if there was money, they could correct it by genetic engineering, the way they can genetically correct patients with with various hemoglobin abnormalities.
Like maybe in the future, like you don't have to be dependent on, like other donors. Maybe you can, like create a liver through 3D printing.
Yeah, right.
Using
bioengineered 3D printing.
Yeah, Doc. So next thing
they're
should be on your
3D
list.
printing organs.
Yeah. Next thing on your list should be, like creating, like artificial, like organs.
So when you're not trying to change the world and make it a better place, what are you doing? What are your hobbies? What do you like to do to decompress? Or
I'm an amateur acrylic painter.
Really? Oh, I wish you had some works to put on camera right now. I'd love to see it.
I'm looking at my phone to see if I can show you one picture.
My daughter is a little aspiring artist. She's 10. A little bit closer, right there. Oh wow, that's beautiful. How big is that piece, Doctor?
Oh, that's at least I guess 3 feet high by 1.5 feet.
Wow. So my daughter is asking for Christmas.
I make the frames too.
Yes, so that should be on your site.
Yeah.
Yeah, people who are donating, they should get this.
There you go.
It's not amateur. You are a professional. Looks like a professional.
I'll do some abstract things too.
Okay.
Yeah, both my son and my daughter are getting into art now. My daughter wants acrylic marker pens. These pens that
I see.
When you write with them, they use acrylic paint. And my son wants a digital art tablet, not like an iPad or something, but a tablet that's just for drawing, and it's got like feedback and stuff like that. It's really cool. Okay, right there. There you go. Oh, wow.
I did that for one of my great nieces.
Oh.
Wow.
So that's what I do for a hobby.
How long have you been doing that?
Only since my wife died, which was in 2014, February the 1st, 2014. Wow. And then after that, I got into internet dating.
Are you a successful internet dater?
Yes. Well, I guess
what's the best internet dating site?
I don't know. She may want to just show it. This is my current.
Bean squeeze.
Oh,
well, Doc, you're a handsome guy, but you definitely shot up. You aimed high and you nailed it. Good job, bud. What's her name?
She's
there you
very
go.
Nice.
Yeah. Good. So what's the best internet dating site for our audience? I've been married since they've been out.
After my wife died, about a year after, I have 3 nieces who are my sister's daughters, and they said, "Oh, I should do internet dating." I had never done anything like that before, and so then I started, and I went on Our Time, which is for people over 50.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing. I'm not sure the exact numbers, but there seem to be many more women than men.
Huh.
And in fact, there were so many women that I never had to message anyone. I was sort of, I won't say inundated, but I had enough who were messaging me to make a choice.
So in your registration, did you put Dr. Lyn Yaffe? Do you think that helped a little bit?
I can't recall. I think I put I was in medical research, something like that. I didn't want to overplay it.
Yeah.
But well,
that's
and
awesome.
so I guess I guess I've probably internet dated maybe 7 or 8 women until the current one that I've stuck with for a while now.
I was going to say,
some of you would do 2 or 3 dates, and that would be that, for whatever reasons. I mean, they were always nice ladies, but compatibility, I guess, is something you have to look for.
With all the serious work that you're doing, saving lives, you are allowed to have fun.
Yeah.
I have fun, paint, and I have what I think is a gorgeous girlfriend. What other hobbies? When I'm losing weight, I like to do it by intermittent fasting. Are you familiar with intermittent fasting?
I am. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Supposedly, it's one of the keys to longevity.
Yeah, I'm
And
trying
so
that right now.
hopefully,
Yeah.
Not eating for
people
5
are
minutes
living
doesn't
longer.
count.
My mother lived to be 98. I have my current girlfriend's mother is 98. I have another friend who had an aunt who died a few years ago at the age of 107.
Wow.
Wow.
Right? She
107. Wow.
That's that's approaching
She-
like biblical
she-
years. Like
Yeah.
She died in the same house she was born in
that's
West Virginia. That's rather amazing.
That is.
But I
Yeah,
don't have any other. I used to have dogs when my wife was alive. We had Great Pyrenees. Are you familiar with the Great Pyrenees?
Giant dogs. Yes, very hairy.
Usually they're all white. We had a male that was 160 pounds.
That's a big dog.
And
Manny's not used to having dogs. He house sat for me one time years ago when we first opened the business. I had to travel with my wife, and he stayed at my house, and I had was it just one or two dogs at the time?
One.
Did I have one? Yeah, it was just one, and she was an
dogs, 2 cats.
she was an older American Pit Bull Terrier, and just a lovey dog. But he's like, Brian, I'm trying to go to the bathroom, and the dog won't leave the bathroom, just staring at me. What do I do? And then he texted me later in the night, the dog won't get out of bed. And I'm like, that's because it's the dog's bed. If you don't want to sleep with the dog, sleep on the couch.
Yeah.
well, with Great Pyrenees, you have to train them not to try and get on the bed.
They're huge.
Yeah. At one time, my wife and I had 5 of them.
Wow.
Wow. That's
But
Do
she
you guys
trained
live
them.
in the city?
No. We live about, as the crow flies, about 23 miles north of Washington, D.C. on
Okay.
5 acres.
Okay, so that
So
you
I
got
have
room.
5 acres.
An
So they
acre
would
per
run
dog.
around outside, but they were very obedient. You would give them the call, and they would come in. And the call was cookies. And they would come running for cookies.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, excellent. Hey, Doc, you've given us a ton of time, and I can't be happier with what we've learned today and what we have the ability to share now because of what you've shared with us. This is an amazing thing I think you're doing. Godspeed to you and your research, and hopefully funds just keep flocking your way to be able to make this happen as soon as legally, morally, and ethically possible for the betterment of lives that you could be saving.
The sooner the better, I want to live
Great.
like more than
Thank you very
107.
much.
You bet.
It's been a real pleasure, guys.
It has been. Thank you so much, Doctor. You take care. We'll hope to see you soon sometime.
Yeah, let's keep in touch.